going, guys? You join me off of beautiful I-90 in Illinois and Wisconsin. I want to make this short video today explaining what you want to find in a flatbed straight truck if you choose to do a job like mine. So right now is a quick rundown for my truck. I drive a 2009 T370. It runs the PACCAR PX8 or Cummins 8.3. It is a 300 horse, 1,000 foot-pound torque engine, made it behind a 10-speed Eaton Fuller manual transmission. The truck is a sleeper. It's a custom sleeper that was added on, 38-inch with a 25-foot flatbed straight. So I have a 10,000-pound auxiliary lift axle installed on it as well. The front axle has been upgraded to carry 16,000 pounds, and with the rear axle, lift axle, and the front axle, I'm good to gross 25,000 pounds in cargo, but ideally I shoot for about 20. So here's all the things that you need to look for when buying a truck like this, whether it be new or used. First, let's start with the manufacturers, the kind of trucks you'll get. There are 4 major brands that you're going to find: International, Freightliner, Kenworth, and Peterbilt. The 2 common ones would be International and Freightliner. If you're looking on the used truck market, you're most likely going to see the Freightliner Business Class M2 or the International Durastar 4600 or 4700, or you want it. Those are not the ones you want to buy. They are too light duty for what we're doing. What you want to find is the International MB that is bumped up. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. Or the International HB, which I almost bought new at one point. If you're going with Freightliner, you're going to want the business class M2 116. I'll probably be putting pictures up to sort of show that. But the M2 116, it's a slightly beefier version of the M2. Kenworth is going to be the T370 is the one you want. Peterbilt's going to be the 330. They're the same chassis and everything, just a different name. Now this takes us to engine. The engines that you're going to want to look for is either an 8 to a 9 liter engine. Do not get the Cummins 6.7. It's the same engine that you find in like the Dodge Rams. It's a great engine, but in the medium duty truck world, they are detuned and they will not, they'll outlast anything you have, but they will not perform the way you would want it to with the weight that we're going to be hauling. So you're going to want to look for a 8 to 9 liter engine, which will either give you a Cummins 8.3 like mine, or you're going to be looking at something like the new Cummins L9, which is a 9 liter. Ideally, you're going to want to look for about 300 horsepower and 1,000 foot-pounds of torque, or ideally 330 horsepower, which is what I have. That, I would say, is about minimum. To give you an example, for me, I usually run at about 35,000 pounds total weight. That's my average. And going up like a 5% grade, I will usually hang with a fully loaded semi, if not past them a little bit. And that's with the 330 at 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. The new Cummins L9, you could get them up to, I believe it's 350 horsepower and 1,250 foot-pounds of torque. If you can, get that. You're going to want to avoid the big 10, 13, and 15 liters just because it's a little bit more than you're going to need, and they're just too heavy. Unless you're building a straight truck to be super heavy duty and haul, 30,000 pounds on it, then maybe you can consider that. But for what I do and somewhere around this, you don't need anything more than about a 8 to 9 liter. Next is your transmission. When you're looking for a used truck, especially of this kind, you're most likely going to find it in an Allison automatic. Allisons make great transmissions, but they are not really good for highway use, for everyday highway use. If you live in a very flat area and you don't plan on going into the hills, you can consider it. But if you're going to be going through the hills, whether it be the East Coast or the West Coast or anywhere where there may be hills, you're not going to want an Allison auto. They just do not hold their power on those hills. When I worked my last job, we had quad axle dump trucks. and they had 450 and 550 horse engines in them with 6-speed Allison autos. And we grossed 80,000 pounds in Tennessee. As soon as you showed it a hill, game over. You were shifting down the second gear, climbing up a 5% grade at maybe 25 mile an hour. That's no good, that's not safe. So what you want to do is you want to find a manual transmission or an automated manual transmission, either a 10-speed, 13-speed, or even a 15-speed. You could do an 18 if you want to, but that's a bit overkill. But it's whatever floats your boat. There's no big deal with that. Another thing you want to look for is make sure that it is not a city-built transmission, meaning it doesn't have a short gear ratio. So like if you're going to buy used, test drive your truck, get it out on the highway, and see what your engine RPMs do as far as highway speeds. This truck here, unfortunately, I think is a non-overdrive 10-speed, because cruising down the highway at 70 miles an hour, I'm turning 1,750 RPM. Now that's not terrible because it's a smaller displacement engine. I think I redline at 2,300 RPM, but that's still pretty high, and fuel economy does start to suffer a little bit doing that. But if you can find something like a 13-speed or a 15-speed or whatever, make sure your actual engine RPMs at 70 mile an hour is really more so around 14 to 1,600 RPM. I think that would do it a little bit better. Basically, make sure it's an overdrive transmission. Make sure your rear end gear ratio, that this all ties into it, is set up for highway driving. But you also want to kind of look at what you're getting. If you got a lower horsepower truck, then you might want the shorter gear ratio so that when you do get into the hills, you're not suffering too bad. Next thing you want to look at is your suspension setup. Again, front axle. Your front end is going to be very important as far as the freight that you haul. Because you got a single unit truck, it's easy to overload the front end. So, for me, I upgraded my front end. You want to go for at least a 14,600 pound front end. Most trucks, especially in a straight truck form, that aren't already built to haul heavy are probably going to have a 12,000 pound axle, maybe even less. Like I think Penske trucks only have 10,000 pound axles. So make sure you get yourself a 14.6, or if you really want to go big, get yourself like a 16,000 pound like I do, or even 20. 20 is a bit overkill, but ain't nothing wrong with it, it's just more expensive. Same thing for rear axle. I run a single axle air ride setup in the rear. Now this is another thing where I wish I could change. It's only a 21,000 pound drive axle. Now that's all fine and dandy on the road, but because I have the lift axle, if I'm ever running super heavy and I have to back up, since that lift axle is on a caster system, if I back up, the wheels would cock sideways just because they will steer and reverse, so they automatically pick up. When that happens, if I'm running heavy, that means all of a sudden there's a bunch of extra weight on the drive axle, and it's only good for 21,000 pounds. So that means you're really stressing the airbags. For the most part, when that weight suddenly hits, those airbags compress and it bleeds all the air off. So it's kind of a safety, but I wish it was a heavier grade. That way I could reverse a little bit safer. But you can get those in 23,000 pounds or even 25,000 pounds. What I don't know is what happens as far as ride quality. I think, or at least I would think, that if you have like a 25,000 pound air ride, it might be a little bit bumpier when you're lighter, but I don't know. That also comes into another thing. Because it's a single axle setup, it's going to ride rough regardless of air ride or not, because you got one axle. If you hit a pothole, the entire truck falls into that pothole. A tandem axle setup, only part of it falls in. When only part of it falls in, there's a little bit still being held up. So this kind of comes down to what would you prefer. I went with a single axle mostly because it's light, it's cheaper on the toll roads, and there's a little less maintenance with it. Now you could get a tandem axle with a lift on it. Good luck finding something like that used, but obviously you see it with the FedEx Custom Critical. They'll often have that full-size lift axle on there. You can do that, but again, that's more weight that you're carrying around, and that's 4 extra tires versus for me where I have 2 extra tires, and those tires are cheaper. But really it comes down to your personal preference on whether or not you want a tandem or a single axle. Single axle is going to ride a little bit rougher, but it's cheaper, lighter, allows you to haul more freight. Tandem axle will ride a little bit smoother, but it's heavier, has a little more maintenance, and a little bit more just cost all around. Next up, you're going to need to look at the size of the truck. So pretty much for all 48 states, you can really only be 40 feet long. About half of the states will allow you to be 45, but obviously you want to be compliant for all. So your truck needs to be 40 feet long. My truck is 38 feet long. Why they left 2 feet on the table, I don't know. But what you want to do is you want to look for, the reason why I say to find a medium duty truck versus like an actual class 8, like a Cascadia or an International LT or a T800 or Peterbilt 379 is that length. Because you want to be able to haul as much cargo as you can, you need the longest bed you can possibly fit. So a medium duty truck has a shorter hood because it's supporting a smaller engine. What you'll probably have to do is either install a sleeper if you're doing a Kenworth or a Peterbilt, just because they do not offer sleepers from the factory on their medium duty trucks. I think their brand new ones are now. I'm not sure on that. I would love if they did. If you're getting a International or the Freightliner, they do have extended cabs with bunks in them. I'm sure you guys might have seen it. If you're going that route, make sure you try to find one of those. Basically what you're looking for is the smallest cab possible and the smallest bunk possible. That's if you're interested in having the longest bed. Now, if you know that you're going to be hauling smaller freight or lighter freight, or you have a very specific customer that you're working with, and you feel like you want to splurge on a bigger sleeper, by all means, go for it. Me personally, I'm trying to keep as many doors open. So, obviously, I found this truck with the sleeper on it, but when originally I was going to buy new, I spec'd out an International with the extended cab sleeper. I'm young, I can live sort of cramped. It don't bother me that much. So obviously that comes down to your personal preference, but if you want to haul more cargo, you're going to need a longer bed. That means a shorter truck. I wish we could start getting some cab overs over here like the Europeans have. I know we used to run them a long time ago, and you could still find some like the Freightliner or Grossi, but they're hard to come by. Another thing that you need to make sure you have as the sun beats down on my face, make sure your truck has an engine brake or a Jake brake or any type of compression brake, transmission retarder, I don't care. Make sure you have one, especially if you're going to be running heavier work like I do, 20,000 pounds cargo, 25,000 pounds of cargo, to where your truck is weighing almost 40,000 pounds. When you're coming down these mountains, you cannot be relying on your brakes. You need to have an engine brake. And unfortunately, things like the smaller medium duties like the International 4600 or the Freightliner M2, a lot of those will not have the engine brake. Make sure that is your top priority when looking for a truck, whether it be new or used. Make sure it has one. That is super important, because the last thing you want to do is be smoking your brakes coming down a mountain, especially if you're only running a single axle setup and maybe you didn't even get a lift axle. It's so easy to smoke these brakes out. If you're having a custom bed built, there's a lot of things that I'm trying to even think of as I'm saying this, that you need to make sure you do. For one, when you build your bed, have stake pockets and have the round winch pockets, or winch spools, I guess you could say. Something to wrap your chains around. I'll show you on mine here in a minute. Make sure you have those. Make sure you have a winch track both on the right side and the left side of the truck. I only have mine on one side, so that means when you're tightening down cargo, it's all pulling in one direction. You want to be able to pull it both ways. You're going to want a lot of storage as well. So for my truck, I have 2 toolboxes, and I got 2 more on order. You're going to need a lot of storage because you're going to find that you need to haul a lot of different tools and equipment to really be able to sustain out there. Another thing to help out as far as loads and whatnot is try to get a truck, either install one or find one with it have a pingle hitch and a reese hitch. That way you could do some power only work. It's very difficult to find, and honestly it's rare for me to ever haul it, but once you have that, it will open up a lot of opportunities to make some extra money. You'll still be restricted by length. Technically, I think this varies by state. For the most part, you could be 65 feet overall length, but I know there's a few states in there that only say 60 feet. A lot of states don't enforce it, some do. It's kind of a real sketchy gray area, I guess, but have that just so that you can tow things if you need to. It's a good addition, doesn't cost much, doesn't cost you anything in terms of weight. Why not? Another thing, going back to the truck itself, make sure it has fuel tanks. I know a lot of the lighter duty trucks will maybe only have one 50 or 75 gallon fuel tank. If you're going to be running this truck over the road, you need to have at least two. I have two 75 gallon fuel tanks that totals 150 gallons. That'll usually get me about 900 to 1,000 miles per fill up. That's averaging at about 8 miles to the gallon. So 7 to 8 miles to the gallon. So make sure the truck has fuel tanks. If it doesn't, you might want to consider adding some, because you're going to be filling up a lot. If you're coming from a pickup truck Hotshot, you're going to know that feeling as you're always in the fuel station trying to find fuel. I know a lot of you guys put auxiliary tanks in the bag. I'm sure that helps, but I don't know. I like to have plenty of fuel on board. So that's all I can think of right now. I'm sure more will come to me later, but right now I'm going to take you, we're going to show you the few pointers that I made and sort of do a quick rundown. So first, upgrade that front axle, or make sure it has one. That's that one right there is a 16,000 pound. Engine, make sure it's an 8 or a 9 liter engine. Transmission, make sure it's a manual or automated manual transmission. Have plenty of fuel tanks, that's locked. 25 foot or longer bed. Winch track on both sides if you can. And this is what I was talking about. Have those round chain spools in the middle. This bed wasn't built without them, or wasn't built with them. And so when I run chains through the pockets, it bends, and I don't like it. It's causing them to break, and I'm hoping to fix that someday. Have a heavier rear axle if you can, especially going with air ride. Do a lift axle if that's something you're interested in. Again, this one's a 10,000 pound lift axle. Get yourself a pingle hitch, reese hitch, air hookups if you need them as well. That helps. Oh, and this reminds me, if you are doing a straight truck, and especially if you have this long overhang, please get yourself a landing gear. This will save you a lot of hassle. Why that's there, if you're ever loading from the back of a dock, this ascent likes to squat down whenever you're putting something heavy on it. That way you can put those legs down and you're firm. Ain't nothing gonna bend there. So again, make sure you have plenty of toolboxes, because you're gonna use every bit of storage. And a sleeper. Unless you're planning on staying in hotels all the time, you're gonna need a sleeper. That is a 38 inch. It's a very simple bunk, but you can customize them. That one has an actual AC blower in it. I put in a TV, so you can still make it sort of homey, just however you want. But that's it. I'm gonna end it here. It's hot and humid. Those are the things you need to look for if you're ever buying a truck like this. And for the most part, if you ever have any questions about that type of stuff, feel free to let me know. Send a message in the comments. I try to read them. Do that, ask me. I'm sure I could tell you something. I've been around straight trucks for a long time. I'm familiar with the drop axles. That stuff is nothing new to me. So ask me, and maybe I could get back to you and help you out. If you want, send me a truck that you're looking at. I'll tell you if it's a good buy or not, or if there's something else you should do with it, or anything. So yes, let me know what you have, and I'll try to help you out. For the most part, I think that's it. I'm going to continue doing some videos here and there, mostly vlog stuff every now and then, giving pointers like this, and just sort of spread my knowledge a little bit. This is a very niche market, and you kind of have to have patience doing this job, but if you got that and you're willing to drive all over the place, you'll do all right. So, all right, that's it. Talk to you later.